Hello, hello. Today we are learning how to fold triple triangle twists. So these weird shapes are three closed triangle twists mushed together, and they're going around a single grid triangle on the back. Excuse me. And we're going to fold this directly from the grid. So I'm going to start with a demonstration on a small grid. This one has 12 divisions on a hexagon, and then we're going to fold a larger pattern spaced a little further apart than this one on a 32-fold diagonal grid. So those grid lines are perpendicular to the edge. So starting off with the single triple triangle, I'm going to start by marking some features of the pattern. First off, this twist is not centered on a grid intersection. So I'm going to be marking around a particular grid triangle. And I'm picking one of the 6 grid triangles around the center of the paper. And I'm going to be marking for a right-handed triple triangle twist. Notice that I'm marking one space of valley past the long valley on the other side. But this is a symmetric marking, so I've got long, short, long, short, long, short on each of those corners. And then the mountain folds are going to come in, and we're going to have yes, apparently that cold is not fully gone. We're going to have a long mountain fold parallel to the long valley, and we're also going to have a long mountain. Really, we're going to have a long mountain on both sides of these long valleys, and that's why these valleys only go one space. And hello to everyone in the chat. I'm glad you could be with us live. And I'll rotate so it's in the same orientation. We've got all of these three-way intersections of mountain folds. And there is one more thing to add. This mountain belongs with that valley, so that mountain still needs another valley. And you can also see this because this mountain has this valley, this mountain has that valley. So this mountain needs another valley. And we can apply that logic to all three. Did I do that right? No, I did not. It is very hard to rotate things in your head. Okay. Excuse me. So we can see from these initial setup creases that we're going to have 2 pleats stacked on top of each other. And because I go mountain, valley, that's going to be an accordion pleat. And the way that you set this up is you focus on the mountain folds. So I'm bringing up these mountain folds and letting the paper hinge on these valleys down below. And I'll do that for all 3 of these triangles. And I usually rotate so that the one I'm working on is in my right hand, or at least closer to me and maybe a bit on the right hand side, because I am right-handed. And once we get the middle happy, then we can focus more on where these valley folds need to lay down, you might be looking at this and saying, gee, that's a mess. And it would be if we tried to squash it all at the same time. But what we can do is take one of these pairs of pleats and flip it over. So that valley ended up being useful after all. And now two of these triangles are laying down flat as three-way intersections, and only one is in place to twist and squash. So then we can squash that one twist on its own, even come in, use the bone folder, and then I'll flip that pleat back, and now I want to flip this pleat, and the valley that I'm flipping onto is going to pass through the squashed twist, which is fine. There's already a grid line there. So I'm setting up the triangle that's on top of the previous triangle, and everything can lay down flat in that state. And I can come in with the bone folder. And then it's time to squash the third one. And here I need to pull apart these two areas of the paper. See how the corner of this three-way intersection is all the way out in the corner of the twist. So I need to lift the first triangle, the corner of the first triangle that we squashed, so that that pleat can lay down flat, which separates the layers. And then we can squash the third twist into place and get it all set up. So yeah, I'm seeing a comment from earlier that they haven't tried it yet, but maybe we could build out more and more and more nested triangles and have many parallel accordion layers. This is something that you see a lot in Alessandro Beber's patterns with the one cube exercise, the Penrose triangle, those kinds of patterns where this structure is the entire background of the pattern. And what he recommends doing is pre-creasing, collapsing in one way, and then tucking corners to finalize the pattern. So there's multiple methods that can get you to these same results. It would be interesting, and maybe if we have time at the end of the video, I can experiment with this and see, well, what would happen if I tried to add on more triangles? So from this point, we've got our triple triangle twist. We can flip over and see there's that single grid triangle on the back. And if anything didn't squash right, we can actually access it from the back. We can poke under with the bone folder and make sure that all of those corners that are tucked under are nice and tight. So that's a way to do some course correction. From here, let's move on to our bigger grid. And I will say that just like the smaller one, this bigger pattern will not be exactly centered in the middle of the paper. So I'm going to mark the center. I'm folding my grid in half, and then so diagonal grid in half is going to fold opposite edges in half, and then I can bring this corner to the bottom corner to locate the exact center point of the pattern, or rather of the grid. And then as I open that up, I'm going to make sure that I have some grid lines going vertically up. And I'll zoom in so we can see all the details. And then my pattern is actually going to be centered around this grid triangle. So there's the center of the paper, and this is the center of the pattern. And from here, I need to locate my next twist. So you'll see me looking to the side. That's me looking at the crease pattern on my other screen. And from this target triangle, we're going to go 2 spaces out from the corner and have a valley going across that way. And we're going to go 4 spaces out from the flat side and have a mountain in between twists. So we can apply that symmetrically on all of our sides. These are the creases that we'll see around the center. And then we have the mountain folds next to the valleys, the valley next to the mountain, and then another mountain between things. And specifically, that's going to be a 3-way intersection. I drew that mountain a little far. That's going to be a 3-way intersection. And that is going to be a 3-way intersection. Let's see. I drew a left-handed one. So let's also do a right-handed one so we can see what that looks like given what we've already practiced. It's going to go 1 space in, and then here I also drew 1 too far. Okay. So once we have, on screen, Madonna. Once we have these 2 in place, we can reference them for all of our future twists. So I'm just going to draw these subsets of the pattern. And I'm going to start with the right-handed twist like we practiced already. Bringing up first 1 3-way intersection, and this time making sure to run my mountain folds all the way out to the edge of the paper. The valleys are a little looser at this point. And then the second and the third. Okay. So you can see how that would have been very confusing if I didn't draw it out first. So from here, I'm going to pick a pleat, just going to arbitrarily pick the one that's not bordering the center. to flip over and squash one triangle, and then that one flips back out, and we want to squash the next triangle on top. So the pleat with the triangle that's tucked under is going to flip. And then I'm going to make sure to bring back first the whole triangle, disambiguating these two layers of paper. And if you really want to, you could try laying this down flat. It's not going to really change anything. We still have two good pleats to press on. And then the corner is tucking under. So there's our first triple triangle of the broader pattern. And then from there, I can use actually some information I have about this pattern, which is that there's going to be one space between the corners of these triple triangles, which means that I'm going to have a valley fold one space out, and then a mountain fold, and that mountain is intersecting the existing mountain, so that needs to be a three-way intersection. And then I'm looking at a little grid triangle that's down in that flat zone between these pleats. It's wedged up in there. That is actually going to be the center of the twist. And I'm going to send my new pleat, and conveniently I had it marked that the mountain goes in that direction. And then my remaining triangle needs to use pleats that make accordions with the other existing pleats. Okay, so now we have a left-handed version. I'm going to start arbitrarily with this triangle being the first one to squash. So I'm flipping these pleats over, squashing first one triangle, then bringing those back up. And this time it's the pleats that are going out away from the center that are going to flip over, including folding that triangle in half and squash. Yeah, it's definitely a weird technique. So earlier was commenting that he didn't have the right technique for flattening the triangles, but now he sees how it's done. And then pulling out the layer, getting that triangle fully set up, and press to squash. And you know it's going well when you have that teeny tiny hole between the three triangles. Okay, so now we're going to treat this triangle like it's any other triangle. We're going to finish the loop of 6 around the center and then move out and do another ring around the center. So I go one space out. I'm going to have a valley. That valley is going to have a mountain beside it, and it's going to make a three-way intersection. All of my three-way intersections with these triple triangle twists have 2 long pleats and 1 short pleat. And then I can say, hey, I've got that grid triangle sitting down in the bottom in the middle there. And that little grid triangle is where the corners of the short mountain folds need to go. So I'm setting up this next three-way intersection so that the short mountain fold, that one space of mountain fold, ends up at the corner of that grid triangle that's down below. And from there, I can set up the remaining pleats of the accordions, which will give me the center of my third three-way intersection. I can also say, hey, there's mirror symmetry between these twists. So I'm just doing one twist and basically mirroring it everywhere. I'm alternating between right-handed and left-handed forms. And that means that I could count out and say that's the midpoint between, like, halfway through this grid line or a little grid segment. And I could say, okay, from that corner, how many spaces out until I hit that three-way intersection? It's going to be at the center of the squash triangle. So I go 1, 2 spaces, 1, 2 spaces. Cool, we're on the right track. And then I pick a side to flip over first. It's kind of arbitrary. Well, actually, not quite so arbitrary, because then the next side to flip, this one is going through an existing twist, but it's kind of fine. You don't need to flip it all the way, and even if you do, everything that's squashed is still in line with the grid lines. But we could choose our starting triangle better to avoid that problem entirely. It's a matter of paying attention to excuse me, which pleat flips and then which pleat flips next. So now we're coming around. We've got these parallel pleats. I'm just going to continue working around, applying the same logic of my valley hits one space out from the corner. That makes a three-way intersection. I've got that little triangle underneath. And that means that my next three-way intersection needs to be over here. And now that is making a pleat overlap. That's fun. And once I have two of my three-way intersections, the third one is determined by adding on the second pleat of the accordion in both of the directions that only had one pleat. So right now, if we want to do this in the cleanest way possible, last time we flipped this pleat first. Of course, last time we were rotating in the opposite direction. Yeah, this time I think doing that twist first, and then we'll flip these pleats later to get this twist on top. Yeah, because the ordering is reversed. So doing this one that's on the top pleat closest to the previous triangle is going to be the best move. This is going to require flipping over our pleat overlap, or pleat overlaps plural. And then when we flip that back and we want to squash that next twist, then it's the other free pleats that need to fold over. And then we unhook those layers, set up the third triangle of the triple triangle, and squash. And at this point, particularly my Tessellation Academy students might be thinking, hey, you're calling this a triple triangle, but it has two pleats coming out of each side. There's clearly some kind of triangular thing going on in the middle. Isn't this a cluster of 4 triangles? To which I say, yes, that is how it works in theoretical applications. And if you can find another cluster of triangles where the spacing between parallel mountain folds of the pleats coming out is 2 spaces, you can absolutely mix and match. And if you're in Tessellation Academy, then you have my crease pattern templates for clusters of 4 triangles, where you will find several that have those 2 spaces. So that's a fun thing that you could play around with using these twists. Another thing that you might recognize if you're in Tessellation Academy is that we use these twists in the latest theory and design workshop with these stacked hexagons, and then use the triple triangle to resolve them. So that's fun. And moving on, here we've got our pleat overlap. It's time to set up 2 of these twists at the same time. So I'm going to have a valley, and then there's the mountain between them, or solid mountain. And the first thing I'm going to do is open up some of the pleat overlaps. So notice this is making a really long I-beam. And I'm only letting this leg of the eye, these 2 legs, go 1 space. And we've got these little floors down at the bottom. So that's going to inform how I can get rid of these other layers that had been overlapping. And you can see the paper is really not happy to be in this state. This is extremely 3D. I'm going to zoom out for a sec. Like, this whole side of the paper is sticking up a fist's height into the air. It is very unhappy to be in this state, because it needs another pleat in here. And I'm poking from the back, getting the curvature in place, adding in that second pleat of the accordion, on each of the 1, 2, 3 pleats that only had a single pleat there. And once those accordions are fully formed, then our paper is pretty flat. So which twist to squash first? That is the question. And there might be a super clean solution to this. There might not. And so what I'm going to say is I think these outermost ones look like good candidates. And we'll see if that holds up. We will learn and we will iterate. But it does mean that I can do them both at the same time. And then when I want to squash that next twist, conveniently, for both of those, this pleat going between these two twists is the one that I want to flip over. So I can go ahead and do both of those. And then pull out the top layer and squash the inner twist. And aren't you glad that we're doing this with an extra space in between instead of having them right up next to each other like I showed at the very beginning? This definitely makes it easier. So from here, let's go ahead and do another ring around the center. And I'm going to arbitrarily start here because we just finished these two. And I'm going to come one space out. That's where my first valley is going to hit. And then my mountain is one space away. It sets up that three-way intersection with the third direction going just one grid spacing and stopping at the corner of this little grid triangle outlined in valley folds. And I can set up another three-way intersection that similarly has the direction with one grid spacing of mountain at the corner of that tiny grid triangle down below. And then the third will complete the accordion pleats. And it's a question of what twist we would like to squash first. Let's go with this one closest to our previous twist. And then opening up the other pleat going out to the edge needs to come over to squash. And then we can pull out the layer and squash the third triangle. And rotate. Now we've got two parallel pleats. I'm going to start at the top of the stairs. So we do have these stair relationships where this one's layers above, this one is layers above the one further on. Yeah, and Erlu's saying in the chat that they tried the most recent exercise in Tessellation Academy that I had showed with the stacked hexagons. And yeah, it's a fun design. And knowing this triple triangle really opens up a lot more options when it comes to hexagons and triangles. So from here, we're getting close to the edge, so danger zone. I'm going to have the valley hit one space out from this top triangle, or the triangle corner on the top plate. And going to have my three-way intersection there. My next three-way intersection is going to also have that mountain come to the same grid triangle. And I could, if I wanted, set up the third before I run the pleats out to the edge. And in this case, this will cause a pleat overlap. Not much of a pleat overlap because it's right at the edge of the paper, but indeed a pleat overlap. And let's see if I remember correctly. For the left-handed twists, we want to squash this one first. Or wait, that would be flipping this pleat. Yeah. We'll try the one closest first and see how it works out. See if we have a new rule. Oh, hey. It is working well. Cool. First one, second one. Pull out the layer and squash the third. And for the paper that I'm using, Skytone, this operation is going pretty smoothly. But if you were using something lighter like Kami, I would expect a lot more paper getting trapped and crumpling and stuff like that. So this is where using a medium weight paper is really beneficial. So now we're in the same situation that we were before. These pleats are going out away from the overlap, and we're going to have that valley in between the mountain, making that little I-beam structure. We're not really going to see that valley right away, but it is important to know which side it's on. And then here I'm making my second three-way intersection. I'm going to go ahead and start ghosting in the third, but I'm not going to enforce it all the way over. So I have room to put in the second three-way intersection up above. And you can see this is really starting to form itself. That's another great thing about using Skytone, is that the paper is stiff enough to kind of carry your intention from one area to the next. Okay. Let's see. So last time we kept this pleat in place for the first pair of triangles. And then we flipped that pleat in for the second pair of triangles. And then we can disambiguate the layers. on both sides, set up those triangles, and squash. And I must say, I'm also mildly shocked at how well these twists are all going. And by the way, this is as close as we're going to get to the edges because we are working on the side where the pattern is offset from the center. So when you finish the whole pattern, if you want to trim your edges to all match this one space from the triangle to the corner, you could totally do that, and then the pattern would be centered on the paper. So here, the pleat at the top of the stairs is further up. So I'm going to jump up and work from there. I'm going to have my valley hit one space out from the triangle corner, mountain one space further than that. And then using that little grid triangle that was showing up down below, I'm finding my remaining three-way intersections. Also making sure to have accordion pleats coming out. And then we're going to do the triangle closest to the previous triangles first. And then the triangle that lays on top of that triangle corner. And then disambiguate and squash. So you might be wondering, okay, great, we can use these triangles on the same side of the paper, mirror everything. We can use these triangles mixed in with stacked hexagons. What else can we do? You can also use these triangles alternating on opposite sides of the paper. Although I would have to do a lot of experimentation to figure out what kind of triangle wrap to recommend during that process. So it is doable. When I did a pattern using that, I made the mistake, I can now say, of putting them too close together. And that meant that I had to pre-crease everything. So it is totally possible to use these twists without pre-creasing, assuming you're not also, stacking them right on top of each other. Because you do need the freedom to flip these pleats back and forth. Yeah. And Erla has confirmed in the chat that printer paper was more difficult to use. So he's going to try it next time with Skytone. Okay, so you can see here that there's a little extra space. There's half a space extra in this pleat compared to this pleat. And that, as I said before, is because of folding the pattern centered around a grid triangle while the paper is centered around a grid intersection. And continuing around here, I have two parallel pleats, and this one closer to me is the top of the stairs. And basically, starting from the top of the stairs is allowing me to keep the heuristic of what order I'm folding each of these little triangles inside of the triple triangle twist. It's not something that, like, the order of folding these twists is not something that would prevent me from folding the other twists. It's just that we're in a rhythm and it's working well, so we may as well keep that rhythm. So triangle closest to existing triangles, and then triangle above the corner of the one we just squashed, then disambiguate, stabilize, and squash. And now for that intersection where I'm setting up two at the same time, I'm finding my spacing for that first I-beam, finding my little triangle floors, finding the second, and I've learned it's easier to go ahead and set up the third, and then going up above, finding the second and the third. And only then am I worried about activating the valley fold on the inner side of the first mountain fold. And then we're flipping both of these free pleats to squash the triangles kind of on opposite sides, and bringing those free pleats back, we'll flip the pleat going between these two triple triangles, and then disambiguate layers, and squash. And next set of parallel pleats, the top of the stairs is further away from me, so I'll start there. I'm going to start moving a bit faster because we have seen these exact steps before. So, not rushing, just moving at all deliberate speed. And squashing the one closest to the previous, or to the next twist on the pleat, and then the one above that twist corner, disambiguate, and squash. And now I'm back to my overlap, my friendly overlap, where I will tuck in this layer. And it's real easy to default to letting that mountain run through, but we really need it to stop one space from the three-way intersection. Then we can solidify one, and then the other of our triple triangles. Firm up which direction those pleats are going, and then these going out to the edge are going to fold over as we squash one triangle, and then bring them back and flip the pleat in the middle, or between the two triangles rather, and then separate layers and squash and squash. Oop, that one's fighting me. I'm gonna flip over and see. Okay, I can stick my bone folder in. Try not to make the problem worse. And that smoothed out enough that it's squashing nicely now. And then on to our last set of parallel pleats. There are 1, 2, 3 of them, and I'm going to start from the top of the stairs. Starting with 1 triple triangle, which causes pleat overlap. And I'm going to squash first the triangle closest to the previous triangle on the pleat, and then switch which free pleat I'm flipping to squash the second. Disambiguate layers and squash the third. And then I've got my pleat overlap. Going to run. So I'm going to have a valley that hits one space out. I could also think these three-way intersections are 2 spaces out from these corners. Then I can see the triangle floors down below and find the remaining intersections for 1. And for the other, and this top one is going to cause pleat overlaps, as expected. From here, I'm going to flip these free pleats. Yes, even though it has an overlap, I'm calling it a free pleat. And then bringing those in, I'll flip the pleat between these new twists. And then disambiguate layers. And squash. And then one more repeat of the same move. where we've got that friendly overlap of accordion pleats, opening them up, getting that great big long I-beam, and then our second and third three-way intersections, and then getting all of the valley folds in place. And as we just did, flipping the free pleats, then flipping the pleat in between, making sure to fold through the triangle we just squashed. And then opening up and squashing the third triangle. So that is the mirrored triple triangles pattern, and on this 32 division diagonal grid, we are just one space away from the edge on two sides, and then a space and a half on these two sides, and 2 spaces on these two. So if you wanted to go in and trim everything to 1 space, then you would be actually centered on that grid triangle in the middle. And I guess the back side, always interesting. Those may look like open triangle holes, but they're more like cursed triangle twists. So yeah, it's very interesting seeing this pattern, but the other side is triple triangles, not open triangles. And then Early was asking about testing the same technique with other types of triangles, like maybe open triangles, maybe something else. And you can actually do something similar with rhombus twists. So notice these are the same exact corners, except instead of triangles, the shape continues and becomes a rhombus. And you might actually be able to do repeats of this without pre-creasing. I was doing this test yesterday and was able to do it without pre-creasing pretty cleanly. And particularly, the idea occurred to me, the trouble with these is that you have so many different layers to get through these 3 rhombi and the effective triangle in the middle, that you usually end up having, I'll use this as an example, 2 of these completed and one of them that needs to be set up as a 3-way intersection, which if you leave it set up as an intersection is going to fold through an existing twist, cause trouble further up. But if you just go ahead and fold that as a triangle, that's much easier to deal with. Then you can come back and turn it into a rhombus later in the next ring around the center. So if you don't mind that extra line in the middle of your rhombus, that would be a good option. And you wouldn't even have to use the bone folder on that line. So there are options. There's also a cluster of square twists that act similarly that I talk about, I think, in the first round of advanced twist techniques, which is where these triple triangles first show up in my teaching, the first round of advanced twist techniques. Of course, I don't think I had the great tricks to fold them at that point in time. But there are definitely options for how to use this in other patterns. So yeah, definitely a lot of cool things going on. We can actually, ooh, and I remember I said we were going to try bringing this back and adding more triangles to it. So if I was going to do that, I would be taking one of these triangle corners and popping it down in to add a new triangle on top. I'll go ahead and, well, maybe. And I'm doing a bunch of wraps to get things to lay flat on other sides. Basically, it makes a giant mess. But you can add another triangle there. And then if I wanted to add another triangle in here, I'd need to pop that corner down and this corner down. So let's see, that would be something like this. And that needs to wrap. Okay. Looks like I need some more triangles to get it to lay flat again. Maybe. I would expect it to need a lot of triangles to be any kind of reasonable again. But yeah, you can keep adding triangles. But I am doing this with a lot of air folding. And I'm not 100% convinced that I've added precisely the right ones. And let's see what happens if I try and add a row of them at the same time. So if I'm trying to add these two, I can start one and then start the next, and then get them both kind of snuggled in and finished. But it's a bit messier than we've been seeing. But only a bit. And this one needs another to finish the row. And yeah, there's something weird happening. Thinking I might have added too many. But you can keep on going with this idea until the whole grid is finished. Let's see. These are acting nicely, so I can try adding to them. Yeah, this will be another start both and then finish them. Lots of air folding going on at the moment. And mostly I think this edge is happy because it's the edge of the paper. And there's one more overlap in here. So I think if I bring this out, then that would just be pleats headed out that way. But again, edge of the paper. So I think earlier the answer to the question is yes, it can be done, but you might need to do some air folding and be okay with a bit of imprecision. Oh yeah. Yeah, this is very much the background in a lot of Alessandro's pieces. But now I'm wondering, if I set up 1, 2, 3, 4, well, I don't have enough paper to really truly test this, but if I set up another row, are those going to be easy to squash? So I'm popping those corners down, which is making some ridiculous curvature in the paper if I'm not very careful about it. And this is sky tone, so I can get away with a lot. But this is still stretching it to the limit. And the problem is that I need to start squashing the ones up here to get the pleat out of the way to squash the one below, but I need to squash the one below to get the fold out of the way to fit the new twist. And so you can see those holes are bigger than the ones further down, which I can go into the back and massage things and get things more trued up to grid lines. And get those holes a little bit smaller, but it's still very difficult. So when you're working with a huge mass like this, I would recommend pre-creasing and collapsing. But if you have just 3, then you can go ahead and use the tricks that I taught today. So happy folding, everyone, and I will see you next week. I think I'm talking about project planning, so when to use a diagonal grid versus a standard grid versus a rotated grid, and what that will do for your finished projects. So happy folding, and see you then.